It's February 1836, and San Antonio, DA, is a town on edge. The winter air is cool, but tension clings to the narrow streets. At the center stands an old Spanish mission, its weathered limestone walls never meant for war. In days, it will become the focal point of one of the most famous sieges in North American history, the Alamo. Texas was in rebellion. A decade earlier, Mexico had invited settlers from the United States to its northern frontier. They brought their own customs, language, and politics. Disputes over governance, religion, and slavery grew until, by late 1835, Texian revolutionaries seized San Antonio from Mexican forces. Many of those fighters now huddled inside the Alamo, waiting for Mexico to strike back. The defenders were a patchwork. Lieutenant Colonel William B. Travis, just 26, commanded the regulars. James Bowie, a frontiersman famed for the knife bearing his name, led the volunteers, though illness soon confined him to bed. Then there was David Crockett, better known as Davy Fresh, from Tennessee, with a small group of riflemen. His reputation as a marksman and former congressman brought celebrity to the mission, though it did nothing to improve their odds. The Alamo was never designed as a fortress. Built in the early 1700s as a Catholic mission, it had thick stone walls, a small chapel, and surrounding buildings for worship and housing. The Texians improvised: cannon on earthen ramps, wooden palisades to close gaps, and patched walls. It could repel small attacks, but against a professional army, it was a gamble. That army was already on the move. General Antonio de Santa Anna, President of Mexico and commander of its forces, was furious at the rebellion. Personally leading thousands, he marched through the winter cold to catch the rebels off guard. By mid-February, reports reached the Alamo. Santa Anna was coming fast. Inside, fewer than 200 defenders weighed their options. Many had families nearby and saw retreat as abandoning San Antonio. Some hoped reinforcements might come if they could hold out. Supplies, ammunition, food, water were limited, but morale was stubborn. This wasn't just about a building, it was about refusing to bow. On February 23rd, watchers on the walls saw them. Long lines of Mexican soldiers advancing toward town. The mission's bells rang out as defenders scrambled to posts. Santa Anna ordered a red flag raised over San Fernando Cathedral no quarter. The siege had begun. Mexican artillery surrounded the mission, cutting off escape and bombarding the walls. The defenders fired back, but the cannons pounded day and night. Dust and stone fragments filled the air. At night, sentries peered into the darkness, expecting an assault at any moment. Instead, Santa Anna's plan was attrition, wear them down before the final blow. Inside, days blurred. Men repaired walls under fire and tended to the wounded. Bowie gave orders from bed. Travis wrote appeals for reinforcements, and Crockett moved among the men, lifting spirits. A strange camaraderie formed each man, aware they might not survive. From the outside, the fight might seem hopeless, a small force against thousands. But early in the siege, hope lingered. Riders slipped out under cover of night to seek help. Rumors swirled that more men were coming. While Santa Anna's army encircled them, the Texians believed grit and luck might still tip the balance. What's striking about these opening days is how ordinary moments persisted between danger. Men mended gear, shared meals, and told stories by firelight, all while knowing an army waited just beyond the walls. The Alamo was not yet the desperate last stand it would become. It was a tense gamble, and the dice had just been thrown. And in the quiet, before the storm's peak, both sides readied for the moment when everything would change. That moment was coming fast. The last time we left the Alamo, Santa Anna's army had arrived at the mission, raising the red flag of no quarter over San Antonio. Now, the days ahead would strip away any illusions that this was going to be a short fight. From the walls, the defenders could see the enemy entrenching. Mexican engineers set up more artillery positions each day, tightening the noose. Their cannon fire didn't just chip at the stone, it echoed in the chest. A constant reminder that death was only one lucky shot away. Inside, men tried to snatch sleep between bombardments, knowing they'd be shaken awake by the next thunderclap of incoming fire. William B. Travis took command of the regular forces, while James Bowie, though increasingly bedridden, retained authority over the volunteers. It was an awkward dual command, but necessity held it together. Their primary goal was simple: survive long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Travis sent messengers riding through the night toward Goliad and Gonzales, pleading for aid. On February 24th, Travis wrote what would become the most famous dispatch in Texas history. He addressed it to the people of Texas and all Americans in the world, describing their dire situation and declaring his intention to defend the Alamo to the last against Santa Anna's forces. In bold letters, he signed it with a defiant victory or death. The letter rode out under the stars with courier Albert Martin, hoping that somewhere down the line it would spark action. By day, the Alamo's defenders worked frantically, reinforcing walls, shifting cannons, and plugging weak points with anything they could find. They knew the mission's defenses were patchwork at best. The south wall was low, the north wall long and thin, and the wooden palisade on the east side could be set alight if attackers got close enough. Every man knew these vulnerabilities by heart. Meanwhile, Santa Anna didn't rush. He understood the value of psychological warfare. His men played music almost constantly, sometimes the pounding notes of military marches, sometimes the haunting strains of El Degüello, a bugle call that meant no prisoners would be taken. And it wore on the men inside. Tensions rose as the days dragged on. Supplies dwindled, Bowie's illness worsened. Crockett and his Tennessee riflemen moved wherever they were needed, manning artillery, repairing fortifications, or standing watch during the cold hours before dawn. Travis kept up appearances, moving along the walls, speaking to the men directly. The skirmishes started small. A few sharpshooters from the Alamo would pick off enemy soldiers as they worked too close to the walls. Mexican forces returned fire, forcing the defenders to duck for cover. One night, a small group of Texians slipped out to burn some of the Mexican artillery positions, but had to retreat before they were overwhelmed. These moments bought time, but they didn't shift the balance. By now, the reality had set in. No one was riding in to break the siege overnight. Reinforcements would be days away if they came at all. The men faced a choice that wasn't really a choice: fight on, or abandon the mission and leave the civilians in San Antonio at the mercy of Santa Anna's army. And for many, walking away would feel like surrender, not just of a position, but of an idea. This is where the siege began to feel less like a military engagement and more like a test of endurance. The men were trapped in a pressure cooker sleep, deprived, under constant threat, and unsure if help was coming. If you're enjoying this story, be sure to subscribe. Back in February 1836, there was still a fragile thread of hope. On March 1st, a group of 32 men from Gonzales somehow slipped past Mexican lines and into the Alamo, greeted like long-lost brothers. It was a morale boost, but it barely dented the odds. Now there were just over 200 men facing thousands. Santa Anna's artillery kept up the pounding, and his infantry crept closer each night, their trenches inching toward the walls. Every move was deliberate, every hour calculated to exhaust the defenders before the final blow. What's striking is that both sides seemed to understand they were part of something bigger than the immediate battle. For the Texians, the Alamo was a statement of defiance. For Santa Anna, it was about crushing rebellion with such force that no one else would dare rise up. In that way, the mission's walls weren't just holding soldiers, they were holding the weight of two visions for the future. By the first week of March, the lines had been drawn. The tension wound tight. The defenders were gaunt from sleepless nights, their uniforms torn, their ammunition counted and recounted. Outside, Santa Anna's troops were preparing for something they hadn't yet attempted: on all-out storming of the fort. That moment was coming, and everyone inside the Alamo knew it. The siege was no longer just a test of will, it was about to become a fight for survival. In Part 2, reinforcements from Gonzales had slipped through the siege lines, bringing the defenders to just over 200 men, but they were still surrounded by thousands, and Santa Anna's artillery was closing in. By early March, the Alamo was under constant pressure. Mexican guns fired day and night, their crews rotating in shifts, so the bombardment never let up. The defenders had learned to recognize the sound of incoming rounds, the heavy thump of a cannon, the faint whistle of a ball in flight, the shattering crack when it found stone. Dust hung in the air, even on calm days, coating every surface inside the mission. Despite the pounding, life inside the Alamo had a strange rhythm. Men worked at repairs during the day, plugging gaps in the walls with rubble and timber. Others kept watch from firing positions, trading shots with enemy sharpshooters. At night, the fires in the Mexican camp glowed all around them, a reminder that there was no escape. Sleep came in snatches, interrupted by the thud of distant drums or the blare of a bugle call. Tensions rose as the enemy lines crept closer. Santa Anna's engineers dug zigzagging trenches toward the fort, moving under cover of darkness to avoid being picked off by Texian rifle fire. Each day, the defenders would wake to find the enemy had edged closer still. Travis continued sending dispatches, though he knew each courier risked capture or death. His appeals grew more urgent, his words less formal and more pleading. In one note to Colonel James Fannin at Goliad, he begged for immediate assistance. Fannin began preparations to march, but delays, confusion, and the sheer logistical challenge of moving men and supplies meant that help would never arrive in time. The skirmishes intensified. One night, a group of Texians launched a daring sortie, slipping out to spike several Mexican cannons, driving iron nails into the vents to disable them. The raid succeeded, but only temporarily. The guns were repaired within a day. Still, these small victories lifted spirits, proving the defenders could still strike back, despite being hemmed in. Inside, James Bowie's condition had worsened so much that he could no longer leave his bed. The command of the volunteers effectively passed to David Crockett, whose easy manner and humor masked the fact that he was as worn down as anyone. Crockett's riflemen often took the most dangerous positions along the palisade, where the walls were weakest. By March 4th, Santa Anna's siege lines were within musket range of the mission. The bombardment was now accompanied by sporadic infantry probes, testing the defenders' responses. The Texians fought them off, but the constant alerts meant no one could fully relax. Every shadow could be an attacker, every sound in the dark a sign the assault was about to begin. Morale was strained, but not broken. There were moments that bordered on surreal, men swapping jokes while cannon fire shook the ground. or pausing in the middle of repairs to share coffee brewed over a small fire. In those brief interludes, the war seemed far away, even though it was literally on the other side of the wall. On March 5th, Santa Anna called a council of his officers. Reports indicated the defenders were exhausted and short on ammunition. The general decided it was time to end the siege. He ordered an all-out assault for the following morning, before dawn, to catch the defenders in the half-light. That night, Mexican soldiers made their final preparations, sharpening bayonets, issuing extra ammunition, and assembling scaling ladders. Inside the Alamo, Travis gathered his men. According to later accounts, he addressed them plainly. No reinforcements were coming, and the enemy would attack soon. Every man had to decide whether to stay and fight, or attempt a breakout under cover of darkness. Most stayed. Whether out of loyalty, defiance, or the knowledge that escape was nearly impossible, they chose to face what was coming. The night was cold and eerily still compared to the days before. The bombardment quieted deliberately so. The defenders would have no warning of the attack. Some men sharpened their knives. Others checked their muskets one last time. Bowie lay in his bed, pistols within reach. Crockett moved along the walls, speaking quietly to the sentries. It's hard not to imagine the thoughts that must have filled those final hours before the storm. In modern terms, it's like sitting in a room knowing 100 armed men are just outside your door, waiting for the signal to come in. You'd hear every creak, every breath, every shift of your own heartbeat. By the early hours of March 6th, the Mexican columns were in position, silent and ready. The men inside the Alamo couldn't see them in the darkness, but they could sense the stillness before impact. Somewhere out there in the night, thousands of feet stood poised to move as one. And when they did, the siege would no longer be a waiting game. It would be a battle to the death. In Part 3, the siege had tightened to its breaking point. Santa Anna's troops poised in the dark, and the defenders of the Alamo bracing for the final blow. The attack began before dawn on March 6, 1836. In the cold pre-morning air, the Mexican army moved in for columns, advancing silently until the bugles shattered the quiet. The notes of El Degello cut through the darkness, signaling the promise of no mercy. Almost instantly, the calm was gone, replaced by shouting, musket fire, and the deep, steady boom of cannons firing canister shot into the oncoming ranks. Travis, positioned along the north wall, was among the first to respond. He fired his rifle, then drew his sword, rallying the men around him. Moments later, he was struck down. Accounts differ whether it was a bullet to the head or chest, but his loss was immediate and symbolic. The defense was now in the hands of whoever could hold their section the longest. The Mexican soldiers surged forward under heavy fire. The first wave hit the walls and fell back, torn apart by musket volleys and cannon blasts. The second wave came harder, closing the distance, while the defenders frantically reloaded. Ladders went up against the north wall, and in the half-light, silhouettes of soldiers began to climb. The Texians hacked at the ladders, shot point blank, and pushed attackers back over the edge. But numbers told the story. Every defender had multiple attackers in front of him. Once the walls were breached, the fight shifted to the courtyard and the rooms inside the mission. Crockett and his riflemen reportedly fell back to the chapel, holding their ground as long as they could. In another part of the compound, James Bowie, too sick to stand, fought from his bed with pistols in each hand until he was overwhelmed. The chaos was absolute. Smoke filled the air, lit by the flash of gunfire. The defenders fought room to room, corner to corner, knowing there was no retreat. Those captured alive were quickly executed. In less than 90 minutes from the first bugle call, the battle was over. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, the Mexican flag flew over the Alamo. Nearly all of the defenders' estimates hovered just under 200 were dead. Santa Anna's forces paid heavily as well, with hundreds killed or wounded in the assault. The ground was littered with bodies, spent ammunition, and broken weapons. A few non-combatants survived, mostly women, children, and enslaved people who were spared to spread the news of the defeat. Among them was Susanna Dickinson, wife of an Alamo defender, who was sent by Santa Anna with a warning to Texian forces. Resistance was futile. And here's where I'll pause to say, if stories like this keep you hooked, and you want more than just the broad strokes of history, hit subscribe and explore the rest of the channel. These aren't just old events, they're moments that still echo today. For the Mexican army, the fall of the Alamo was a military victory, but not the crushing blow Santa Anna intended. Instead of breaking Texian resolve, it inflamed it. Remember, the Alamo would soon become a rallying cry that drove men to fight harder in the battles ahead. In the hours after the fight, the mission was eerily silent. Santa Anna ordered the defenders' bodies burned in large pyres, denying them formal burials. The smell of smoke and death lingered for days. Survivors from nearby San Antonio watched from a distance, powerless to change what had happened. What strikes me about this moment isn't just the scale of loss, it's the compression of it. 13 days of siege collapsed into a final assault that lasted barely an hour and a half. Imagine training for a marathon and then being told the race is now 100 yards sprinted. Have no time to pace yourself, only enough to pour out everything you had before it ended. That's what the defenders faced. A short, brutal climax to a long, exhausting wait. And while the Alamo was gone, the story wasn't. News of the stand would travel fast, shaping the course of the Texas Revolution and fueling debates that still spark today. In Part 5, we'll move beyond the walls into the aftermath, the political consequences, and how a mission in San Antonio became one of the most enduring symbols in American memory. In Part 4, the siege ended in less than 2 hours of brutal fighting, leaving the Alamo in ruins and nearly all its defenders dead. The morning after, San Antonio was silent, except for the sounds of cleanup. Mexican soldiers gathered weapons and ammunition from the battlefield, stripping the dead of anything useful. Santa Anna ordered the bodies of the defenders burned on large pyres outside the mission. No graves, no markers, just smoke rising over the plains. It was both practical and symbolic, erasing their presence from the land they had tried to hold. News of the fall traveled quickly. Susanna Dickinson, carrying her young daughter, was escorted by Santa Anna's troops to spread word of the defeat. When she reached Texian forces at Gonzales, the shock was immediate. The message was clear. Santa Anna was marching east, and resistance meant annihilation. Yet instead of breaking the rebellion, the Alamo's loss hardened it. Just over a month later, Texian forces under Sam Houston met Santa Anna's army at the Battle of San Jacinto. In just 18 minutes, they routed the Mexican forces, capturing Santa Anna himself. Many accounts say the Texians charged with a cry of "Remember the Alamo," not just as a slogan, but as a concentrated burst of grief, anger, and defiance. In political terms, the Alamo became a tool for recruitment and morale. Newspapers in the United States published dramatic accounts of the stand, often exaggerating details to stir public sentiment. Volunteers poured into Texas from across the U.S., drawn by a mix of idealism and the promise of land. The Texian victory at San Jacinto would secure Texas independence, and the Alamo's defenders became posthumous heroes of that cause. The building itself didn't vanish with the battle. Over the decades, the Alamo's chapel and parts of the compound survived in various states of disrepair, repurposed as military storage, government offices, and even a warehouse. By the late 19th century, preservation efforts began to restore the site as a place of memory. Today, millions visit each year, walking the same ground where the defenders made their last stand. But legacy is complicated. For some, the Alamo is a symbol of courage against overwhelming odds, a story about standing your ground even when the outcome is grim. For others, it's a reminder of a messy and often brutal fight for land and power, tied to the larger history of US-Mexico relations and the expansion that followed. Like many historic sites, its meaning shifts depending on who's telling the story. That's what makes the Alamo so enduring in popular memory. It isn't just the facts of the siege, it's the narrative that grew around it. The details became distilled into a legend, a small group holding out against thousands, buying time for the birth of a republic. Over time, the legend became more powerful than the complex reality. In a modern sense, the Alamo functions like a brand. It's a symbol that can be invoked to rally people, justify decisions, or define identity. Much like certain images or hashtags today can spark instant recognition and action. Remember, the Alamo condensed a whole event into a single powerful call. Its story spread faster and lasted longer than the actual battle. Looking back, what strikes me most is how the Alamo's defenders didn't choose the role history gave them. They were men caught in a moment, making decisions with incomplete information, facing forces far larger than themselves. The world remembers them not because they won, but because they became a touchstone for the idea of resistance itself. And maybe that's the lasting lesson. Symbols aren't born from perfect outcomes. They're forged in the moments when people stand for something, knowing they might not see the results. The Alamo still stands, not as it was, but as a reminder that even the smallest patch of ground can become a battleground for something far bigger than itself.